Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Raja Umar on my channel RU Speaks, and we are here to study history, geography, and global perspectives. So, we are in the topics of history these days, and we are in section 2, and we have already talked about the topics related to the partition of Bengal, and then similar deputation, and the formation of All India Muslim League. Now we are moving towards the next topic, that is the Morley Minto reforms of 1909, Lucknow Pact, Rowlatt Act, and Amritsar Massacre. So we will discuss these 4 topics today in our today's lesson. Do not forget to subscribe, watch, like, share, and comment on my videos. Definitely you will find a greater stuff over there for the subjects of IGCSE O levels Pakistan studies, both components history, geography, and IGCSE O levels global perspectives. So as I was telling you that I am discussing the history topics these days, and just after the topics of section 2, I mean on reaching the events of 1947, then I will switch to the topics of global perspectives, component 3, team project, and that is really very important, very interesting one for all those students who are taking global perspectives as their subject, whether the subject as the extra one, or they are being taught that subject as a regular 9th subject of O levels or IGCSE in their schools. So those topics related to team project, that would be really very much a sort of fun for you all to learn that how a team project should be made of the Cambridge standards and to gain A grade in that one as well. So today we're going to talk about the history topics related to the Minto-Morley reforms of 1909. That is the event of, and we start with this one. And what we observe that first of all we are going to talk about that you should be knowing that these reforms, they were introduced by John Morley and Lord Minto, the Viceroy of the subcontinent. John Morley was the Assistant Secretary of State for the subcontinent appointed by the British government. So he came from there to brought all those you can say proposals given by the British government to the Viceroy that to be implemented over here in the subcontinent. So these two persons, they sat together and they drafted these reforms in 1909, and then they were sent back to the British government for approval, and then the British government, the British Parliament passed these reforms, and then they were imposed over here in the subcontinent. So what were the reforms? Imperial Council increased to 60, majority of them will be the official workers. So it means that the Imperial Council, I mean the council which is composed by the British Empire, that will be now having 60 members in all, but out of these 60, majority will be the British. So it means that still there was no greater say of the locals over here in the Imperial Council of the subcontinent. The Executive Council, the council which were responsible for the administration of the subcontinent, increased with 60 new members in it. Provincial assemblies increased to 50 in large provinces and 30 in small provinces, and separate electorate for the Muslims. So that was the greater achievement for the Muslims over here in these reforms, that what they had demanded in the similar deputation before the establishment of All India Muslim League in 1906. That demand was awarded to them in 1909 of Minto-Morley reforms. And secondly, they got a greater representation over here in the larger provinces, and you know that the larger provinces, they were Bengal and Punjab. and the Muslims were in greater number in these two provinces. So it means that they were able to having the more representation in the provincial councils or provincial assemblies in these two provinces really very particularly. So this is how you can say that they were able to having more say in the government affairs, being more Muslim members into the assemblies. And now surely there would be the more Muslim members over there in the assemblies, provincial assemblies, because of the separate electorate that was awarded to them. So that was a greater achievement right in the beginning of the political career of the All India Muslim League. So now what was the importance of these reforms for the Muslims? You may say that why were the Minto-Morley reforms important for the Muslims of the subcontinent? This can be a 7 marks question for you. And they were awarded with separate electorates, proved that Muslims as a nation, I mean the separate identity, and separate political stature. So it means that now the Muslims could easily flourish independently by having the separate electorate. So that was a greater success. So in this way, you will develop and you will explain this particular reason, that what was the impact of the separate electorate. Separate electorate was awarded to them by the British government in Minto-Morley reforms of 1909. But what was the impact? Number one, they were somehow indirectly declared as the separate nation of the subcontinent if they were awarded with the separate electorate. And because of that separate electorate, now they were having the separate identity in the subcontinent, separate political stature in the subcontinent. Now they could have the right, or they could have the way forward to move further politically towards the betterment of the Muslim rights. More weightage than the population proportion in the legislative councils. So as it was said that mostly the Muslims population was around 25% in the subcontinent, but they got 1/3 seats in the councils. So it means that they achieved 33.33% representation in the assemblies. So again, a greater achievement, and these reforms were really very important for the prosperity of the Muslims' politics in the subcontinent. So more political power and role in the governing state. Definitely when they were having the separate electorate and they were given the more representation, definitely they had got the more role in governing the states, very especially the provinces of Punjab and Bengal. So made Muslims able to counter Congress. Now on the basis of the separate electorate, it was surely more and more Muslim members into the parliament, and they could counter the negative policies of Congress which were going against the Muslims for the last few years. So now why these reforms were important for the Muslims, for the Hindus now? Only a single one: more role in the government, which they were asking for a long time. As they were asking for self-rule for the last many years, very especially after the partition of Bengal, when they launched Swadeshi movement, they boycotted the British goods. Since then, they were demanding for more role of Hindus in the state affairs, and because of these Minto-Morley reforms of 1909, they were able to achieve that one. So, reasons for Congress opposition. Now, still Congress rejected and opposed these reforms of 1909 on what grounds? Number one, number of Indians in councils were increased but only had an advisory role, as it was said that still the British were on the strong footings. They were not losing any grip on the subcontinent's political scene. So they even after increasing the seats in the Imperial Council and the Executive Council and even in the provinces, still they took the majority of the seats or majority of the role in the councils to themselves, and they wanted that whatever the role should be over there in any of the provinces or in any of the councils, they should be by the approval of the British members or the viceroy. So acceptance of Muslim demand of separate electorates was disliked. The Hindus, they got against the separate electorate that was awarded to the Muslims in those reforms. So they went against them, and they protested against these reforms of Minto Morley. Muslims were given extra seats in more and more political status in the Bengal and Punjab, as I told you. So this angered the Hindus, that why the Muslims got more representation. If their population was 25%, why they were given the seats 33%? So this angered the Hindus, and they went against these reforms. Congress expected partition of Bengal reversal to happen in these reforms, as it was 1909, and the British had already partitioned the partition of Bengal province in 1905, and Hindus had protested strongly against this partition, and they were perceiving that the Bengal partition might be get reversed in those reforms of 1909, but it never happened. So this angered the Hindus again, and they went against these reforms. However, they got this particular demand in 1911 by the reversal of partition of Bengal. Importance for the British, that why these reforms were important for the British. Minto Morley reforms, suppressed demand of Congress. I mean, somehow they made the Hindus silent by increasing their representation in the assemblies, or giving them some say in the political system of the subcontinent. In this way, what they perceived, that now the Hindus might not be shouting like previously very strongly against the British, as after the partition of Bengal, they were really very much opposite to the British. So in this way, the British felt that now the negative role of the Hindus might have decreased. Showed that they were willing to give power to the Indians by increasing the number of seats. They had shown that the British were more towards the giving more and more political rights to the people of the subcontinent. So for that sake, it is said that they had done a greater political job for the subcontinent. That's why they felt that whatever the steps they have taken in the form of the Morley Minto reforms, they were really very much good for them. So they made it clear that they were not going to give self-rule, for which Congress was asking. So it means that still the strong grip of the British remained there. So still they said that even after presenting those reforms, still the whole of the subcontinent would remain under the stronger control of the British. So this is how these reforms were important for the British. And here we have certain questions, and I will put the answers to these questions, very especially these 7 markers and 14 markers, over there in the description of this video through my Google Drive link. Click on that link and download those attempted questions of 7 and 14 marks. As you can see that here we have these questions given over here, and I will put the answers of these questions in my Google Drive to make things easier for you to learn. So this was the topic, that was the Morley Minto reforms. Now moving on. Lucknow Pact. Lucknow Pact of 1916, Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim Unity. Quaid-e-Azam was given this title over here just because of this event. Shifting Muslim League policy after the 1911 reversal of partition of Bengal, Muslims started themselves getting away from British and getting closer to the Hindus, as they believe that they could be able to achieve their rights with the support of the Hindus, rather than showing more loyalty towards the British. So after the reversal of partition of Bengal, the Muslim League revisited Morley Minto reforms, criticized because no say in the government, and shifted to self-rule. So they were here previously, as they had got some say in the political system because of the partition of Bengal, as they had got a province in the form of East Bengal to govern. Secondly, they had got separate electorate through Morley Minto reforms. So it means that they were with this point. But when the reversal of partition of Bengal was done and they had left nothing to rule, so then they shifted their policy from loyalty to self-rule. Point number two, failure of British to grant rights to the Indians brought Hindus and Muslims closer, as it was perceived that there was no real power given to the Indians in the form of Morley Minto reforms of 1909, as they believe that those sugar-coated sort of reforms were nothing to do with them and they were not of any benefit to them. So Hindus and Muslims, they started believing that these reforms were not in their favor. So that's why this particular factor brought Hindus and Muslims closer together against the British. So persuasion of Jinnah. Jinnah wanted that, as you know, that Jinnah was the member of both the political parties, Indian National Congress and All India Muslim League at that time. So he convinced both the political parties, as he used to go to the meetings of Indian National Congress and into the meetings of All India Muslim League. So he convinced the leadership of both the political parties to sit together and to discuss their common issues and to put forward the common demands to the British, so that to have a greater and bigger pressure could be over there on the British. Secondly, very important factor, you know that this is 1916, and you know these were the war years. The world was in World War I, 1914 to 1918. So British, they were under pressure over there in war in Europe. And if the Hindus and Muslims, they got united over here in the subcontinent in the form of Lucknow Pact, that would have a greater pressure on the British to give more rights to the people of the subcontinent. So that was a greater tactic played by Jinnah to bring forward both the major political parties of the subcontinent on the table in the form of Lucknow Pact. Joint demands pressing the British to achieve common objective against the British policy of repressing the Indians. So this is what I have said. Now there was a greater majority of the subcontinent, Muslims and the Hindus collectively had brought forward their demands. So those common demands of the Hindus and the Muslims brought a greater pressure on the British to give the more say and more political rights to the subcontinent in the coming years. The British policy of repression against Indians worried Congress and League. Jinnah, member of Congress and League, was a believer in their unity and convinced them to hold the sessions together for Indians' sake. This is what I've said, that it is all about the efforts of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, as he was the member of both the major political parties of the subcontinent, Indian National Congress and All India Muslim League. So he convinced the leadership of both the political parties to sit together. British deliberately let it know that there were what was going on to make these reforms. Indians wanted to let their demands to be known, so they joined hands together. So as you know that the things were moving from 1916 towards the end of this decade. So it was perceived that now till to 1920 there might be some new reforms coming onto the scene. So the British wanted that they should be able to give their proposals in front of the people. So they leaked those proposals to the Indians by themselves, and Muslims and the Hindus, they sat together to draft their common demands collectively, so that what should be coming next, that should be in the minds of the British and in the minds of the Hindus and the Muslims collectively. So joint demands. What were the joint demands presented by the Muslims and the Hindus in Lucknow Pact? Number of elected seats of the councils should be further increased. All provinces should have autonomy, internal independence. It means that the British should not be interfering into the affairs of the provinces, and provinces should be given all political rights and political powers to the locals, rather than provinces should be controlled by the British. Minorities should be protected. Motions which were passed by large minorities in the councils should be accepted as binding by the British government. I mean, if some resolution was passed in the council by large majorities, like Muslims were the larger minority of the subcontinent. They were in greater number, but still they were quite less than the Hindus. So they were the larger minority. So whatever the motions or the resolutions passed by these larger minorities, like the Muslims, they should be binding by the British government, that the British government should be imposing them as they were passed. So the importance of the Lucknow Pact: joint demands were made. So it means that now about more than 90% of the total population of the subcontinent was on the table against the British. So that was a great threat to the British, that now the two greater communities of the subcontinent, they were collectively presenting their demands, and that exerted a greater pressure on the British. So the separate electorate and partition accepted by Hindus, it marked the first acceptance by the Hindus that a degree of partition would be necessary. So it means that now if the Hindus had accepted the separate electorate in Lucknow Pact, it means that the Hindus had accepted the Muslims as separate nation of the subcontinent, as they had accepted the separate electorate for them. So that was a greater achievement. I believe that this particular event, Lucknow Pact, was the actual beginning of the partition of the subcontinent, when Hindus accepted the Muslims as the separate nation of the subcontinent in the form of just accepting the separate electorate. Congress worked with the Muslims, so that was a greater sort of a unity factor among the two communities. High mark of Hindu-Muslim unity, that is what I've explained. Success of Jinnah's efforts, as Jinnah was working for this sort of venture for the last 2-3 years. I mean, since 1913, when he joined All India Muslim League. Since then, he was trying such event to happen, and it finally happened in 1916 in the form of Lucknow Pact. Possibility of self-rule became visible as now the larger population representatives were on the same page. The first agreement between Congress and Muslim League, that showed the again unity factor, that both the political parties of the subcontinent, they were on the single agenda, showed that Muslims had acknowledged they stood with more chances if worked with Congress. Now the Muslims got the idea that if they work with the Congress, definitely they would have the more chances to prosper rather than working with the British. During 1917, two home rule leagues campaigned across India, one led by Tilak and the other by Annie Besant, the English woman. She was the president of Indian National Congress at that time. So at that time, these two personalities, Tilak and Annie Besant, they were working for self-rule for the people of the subcontinent. So you can say that the outcome of the Lucknow Pact started coming in the form of these two people who started working for the self-rule for the Muslims of the subcontinent. So here we have the questions related to the topic of Lucknow Pact, and surely I will put the answers to these questions over there in the description. You can download and you can prepare yourself. Okay. Now this particular topic of reforms of 1919 I will discuss afterwards. Now the actual topic I am here, that is the Rowlatt Act. Background: Rowlatt Act is the event of 1918. This act was passed when the protests over the Montfort reforms started and other minorities began to demand separate electorate. In December 1917, a committee was formed under Justice Rowlatt to investigate revolutionary activities in India, that how the Indians are protesting against the British Acts or the British rules. In 1919, the British had offered concessions in Monte-Clemenceau reforms, which they hoped would win the support of the Indian people. However, they had every intention to taking strong and effective action against any element in India which opposed British rule. On one hand, they were showing that they were more towards the locals, and they were giving more political rights to the people. But on the other hand, they were gripping even further harder on the state affairs of the subcontinent. So it means that in somehow they were ditching the political will of the people, and they were snubbing the rights of the locals over here in the subcontinent. What were the proposals of Rowlatt Act? So there were three. This report was presented in 1918. The Defence of India Act was passed following. So that is known as the Defence of India Act, and this Defence of India Act was passed in the line of these points given by Rowlatt Act. Arrest without warrant. Anyone could be arrested without showing the warrant to the person, and that was totally against the human rights if you arrest someone without showing the arrest warrant by the court. So detention without bail, someone can be detained for as many days as wanted, even if the person gets the bail, still should not be released. So that was again a very cruel sort of point. Provincial governments ordering people where to live. If some people are living in some area, the right of living was given to the government rather than to the people. And it was said that the provincial government could just evacuate all those people from that place and could get the right of living from them and should be thrown away. So that was again very much harsh steps by Rowlatt, and that is what we call the Rowlatt Act. Reactions of Indians, that how did Indians react on this particular act. Muhammad Ali Jinnah resigned from the Imperial Legislative Council in protest, as Jinnah believed that it was really very cruel and very harsh sort of act or law passed by the British government for the subcontinent, so he resigned in protest. Gandhi called strikes against the proposals given in the Rowlatt Act. So again you can see that All India Muslim League and Indian National Congress, they joined hands in protesting against the Rowlatt Act. Then the reasons that why this particular act was imposed: to impose Monte-Chelmsford reforms peacefully, as they were perceiving that when these reforms would be brought forward, the people would further protest or react really very strongly against those reforms. So just to restrict the people to not to go against those reforms, this particular act, Rowlatt Act, was passed, as the people were warned that they would be arrested without any warrant and they could be detained without bail, or the provincial governments could evacuate from all those places where they are living. So that was, again, you can say the major reason was imposition of Monte-Chelmsford reforms. Number two, stop non-cooperation movement. As you know that the non-cooperation movement was in full swing by Indian National Congress, very specially, and they were protesting on across the subcontinent. So to stop the protests of Indian National Congress of this non-cooperation movement, they imposed those cruel laws of the Rowlatt Act to show that British not willing to give more part in politics. So this showed that British wanted their stronger grip or control over the subcontinent in any way, and they were not in a frame of mind to give further concessions, political concessions to the locals. What they believed that they had already gone enough with to give these concessions to the people in the form of Minto Morley reforms. So they were not in a frame of mind to give more concessions to the people. That's why they felt that the locals might be demanding more and more power over here. So to stop them for demanding that power, they imposed this Rowlatt Act. So revolutionary activities, Silk Route conspiracy. So we will discuss this. What is that? Silk Letter conspiracy. that the letters were being exchanged, and they were taken away from those censorship policies, and those letters were given on the silk cloth that is known as the silk letter conspiracy, and those letters were exchanged among the revolutionaries, those who were protesting and fighting against the British cruel rule. So here we have the questions related to the Rowlatt Act. We will give answers to this one again in the description of my Google Drive link. And here came the first sort of you can say the impact of Rowlatt Act, the imposition of Rowlatt Act, that is the Amritsar Massacre of 1919. Background: strikes were going on, demonstrations were going on, caused British to forbid public meetings. The unrest continued. 10th of April 1919, two banks were attacked in the city of Amritsar. 5 Europeans were killed over there. General Dyer, the commander over there at Amritsar, the British commander was determined to restore order, banned all public meetings over there in the city of Amritsar, Indian Punjab. A crowd of about 20,000 people, they turned up for a peaceful protest at Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar. The park surrounded by 5 feet wall with narrow entrance, but the troops of General Dyer, without warning, shot 1,600 bullets, killed about 400 people and making 1,200 injured over there. It made sure that people of Punjab understood they should obey General Dyer. So it means that this particular incident shows that the British were still very strong and they had no intentions to give any concessions or the political rights or even the human rights to the locals over here in the subcontinent. Furthermore, a crowded meeting at Gujranwala, Punjab, currently Pakistani city, was bombed from the air. Deaths, exiles, imprisonments to maintain order. The British wanted their strong control under their hands, so they did all measures and they took all steps to make the things still in their control. General Dyer, it was said that General Dyer did this wrong and he had no right or even not, he hadn't got any order by the British government to fire on the people in Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar. But what punishment he got? He was a hero in the eyes of the common British people, as the British thought that he just tried to maintain order and he wanted that the control should not be loosened up from the hands of the British. Showed the troublemaker that the British is the only who to rule. He was still removed from active service. So they believe that the right of the ruling is only to the British and there is no other one to rule. So if someone goes against the British rule, that person or that community would be taught a lesson. But General Dyer was simply removed from service and he was dismissed from service and no other stronger punishment was given to him, as even he was the killer of about 400 people over there at Jallianwala Bagh. Okay. Causes of the Amritsar Massacre, that why it happened. Point number 1, World War I was the first underlying cause of the massacre. India wanted independence or at least self-governance from British reign, but they were not given. So it means that to keep the control in their hands, this particular event happened. When World War I was ragging, top Indian figures thought the best way to achieve independence was to help the British war effort. So they wanted that the Indians, the locals, they wanted to exert certain pressure, further pressure on the British, as the British were indulged in war. So, but the British, they just taught them that still they they were quite stronger even in the affairs of the subcontinent, and it was nothing to do with them if they were in war in Europe. That was a separate matter for them, but they got their control over here in the subcontinent. India contributed over 800,000 soldiers to the Allied forces in World War I, sacrificing 47,746 lives for Britain campaign. In addition to the great human sacrifice, India's economy suffered immensely, but still India got nothing. And even they got 400 deaths at Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar. In return of this hardship, India expected to be awarded by the British with self-government or independence, but none of the sort occurred as Britain was not obligated to reward India's efforts. Many of the Indians they gave their lives for the sake of the British sovereignty, for the sake of the British Empire in World War I. But what they got bullets from the British. The Rowlatt Act was an extension to the Defiance of India Act, which had been incorporated during the war to detain subversive Indian movements. To diffuse the Indian efforts, the locals' efforts towards the self-rule and to attain independence. This act at Amritsar Massacre proved to be really very fatal for the locals. So, what was the Amritsar Massacre? A 4 marker is given over here in this question, and we will try to design a couple of more questions out of this particular topic, and we are come up with the end of today's lesson. And today we talked about the Minto-Morley reforms of 1909. Then we discussed the Lucknow Pact. Then we talked about the Rowlatt Act, and then we came up with the imposition of Rowlatt Act in the form of Amritsar Massacre. This was our today's lesson, and inshallah we will move further towards the other topics like Khilafat movement and the next events of the 1920s in our next lesson. Do not forget to subscribe my channel RU Speaks. Raja Umar speaks for you for the subjects of Pakistan studies, history, geography and global perspectives. This is over from my side. Inshallah, see you in the next lesson. Till then, Allah Hafiz. Thank you so much.